You think the FBI hunts criminals. That's true. But it's not the whole story. Because the FBI doesn't hunt every criminal the same way. A person who commits a small federal fraud may never see an agent. A bank robber might have agents watching him for days before he even realizes he's a suspect. A drug trafficker can spend years thinking he's invisible, while investigators quietly build an entire map of his organization. And if the crime reaches the level of terrorism, the investigation changes completely. Different people, different units, different technology, different levels of urgency. But one thing stays the same. The FBI is always trying to answer one question. Who are you, and how much of the picture do you actually represent? Because the bigger the crime becomes, the bigger the investigation becomes with it. So imagine that you've committed a crime. Not once, but at 10 different levels. And at each level, the FBI is watching. Sometimes you know it. Most of the time, you don't. This is how the FBI hunts you at every level of crime. Level 1, small federal fraud. You're 26 years old. You need money. And you make a decision that seems small. You file a false unemployment claim. You exaggerate the number of hours you worked. You collect a few $1,000s. Nothing dramatic. No masks. No weapons. No getaway car. You tell yourself it's barely a crime. Maybe the government will never notice. Then, several months later, a letter arrives. It's from a federal office. The letter is surprisingly ordinary. No agents at your door. No flashing lights. Just a request for documentation. You look at the name on the letter. It's not an FBI agent. It's an analyst. And that's when you realize something important. You don't need to be famous. You don't need to be dangerous. You don't even need to be a major criminal to get someone's attention. Your case has been assigned to a junior investigator. Her desk is already covered with other files. Dozens of them. Your case is just one more name in a queue. She doesn't spend weeks following you. She simply compares your claim against existing records. Payroll information. Employment records. Financial data. A few databases. And suddenly, the numbers don't match. Your crime took you months to commit. The investigation takes far less time. The file is documented. The discrepancy is recorded. And the case is referred for further action. You still don't know any of this is happening. You go to work. You eat dinner. You sleep. You live your normal life. Until another letter arrives. This one gives you a choice. Repay the money. Pay the penalties. Or face the possibility of formal charges. And suddenly, the crime that felt small doesn't feel so small anymore. That's the lesson of level 1. The government doesn't need to chase you. Sometimes. All it needs to do is check. One database. One transaction. One inconsistency. And your entire story begins to fall apart. Because the smallest amount of attention is still attention. Level 2, identity theft. Now you're 29, and this time, you've learned something. The first identity theft worked, so you try again. One stolen identity becomes 3, 3 become 11. You open credit accounts, you move money, you use other people's names. And every successful attempt makes the next one easier. You start thinking you've discovered a weakness in the system. You tell yourself the victims will survive. The banks will absorb the losses. The companies have insurance. You barely know the people you're stealing from anyway. But here's the problem. The FBI doesn't necessarily investigate each crime separately. They connect them. A complaint comes from one city. Then another. Different victims. Different addresses. Different accounts. But something is repeating. The same patterns. The same mail routes. The same financial behavior. The same geographic connections. An investigator begins building a timeline. Every transaction becomes a data point. Every stolen identity becomes another piece of the puzzle. And something strange happens. The more crimes you commit, the easier you become to recognize. You thought 11 identities would make you harder to find. Instead, they created 11 trails leading back to you. Investigators begin requesting financial records. They compare transactions. They study movements. They connect victims who have never met each other, and slowly, your life becomes a diagram. A timeline. A network. A pattern. The investigators don't need to catch you in the act. They don't even need you to confess. They simply need to wait. Because every time you use another stolen identity, you add another piece to the picture, and eventually, the picture is complete. By the time agents finally come to your door, they may already know more about your activities than you realize. Where you bank. Where you travel. Which victims are connected to you. Which transactions matter. You thought you were hiding behind other people's names. But the pattern gave you away. You weren't caught in the traditional sense. You were concluded. The investigation had already answered most of its questions. The knock on the door was simply the final step. Level 3, bank robbery. You're 32. And now, you make the mistake of becoming visible. You walk into a bank. 11 minutes later. You walk back out. $40,000 in a bag. A note. A disguise. No shots fired. No one seriously injured. You think the robbery was clean, but the moment you leave, the investigation begins. Agents arrive. They interview the employees. They talk to witnesses. They collect surveillance footage. But they're not only looking at your face. The mask took care of that. They're looking at everything else. Your hands, your posture, your height, the way you walk, the way you stand, the way you move, the smallest details you never thought mattered. Then investigators start following the money. Marked bills appear. An ATM withdrawal is made. Then another. A camera captures movement. A witness remembers a jacket. A tip comes in. One small detail connects to another. And now, the investigation is no longer about a robbery. It's about you. But here's the part you never see. They don't necessarily arrest you immediately. Instead, they watch. For days. You go to work. You buy groceries. You drive around town. You think you've escaped. Meanwhile, investigators are documenting your movements. Because an arrest is not the same thing as a conviction. The case has to survive the courtroom. So investigators build it carefully, piece by piece. Until the evidence is strong enough. Then, one morning, you walk toward your car. You reach for your keys, and suddenly, you're surrounded. The robbery lasted 11 minutes. The investigation took days. Because the crime happened quickly, but proving who committed it takes much longer. That's the math of federal investigations. The crime is often the shortest part. Level 4, interstate drug trafficking. You're 36, and now your operation is bigger. Much bigger. What began as a local supply route has expanded across multiple states. You move packages. You connect buyers and sellers. You transport money. You tell yourself you're not important. You're just a driver. A middleman. A small piece of a much larger machine. And maybe that's true, but the investigators aren't necessarily interested in arresting you first. They're interested in understanding the machine. A task force begins mapping the network. Phone records. Financial transfers. Shipment patterns. Vehicles. Warehouses. Shell companies. Surveillance. Every piece is added to the map. And suddenly, your organization doesn't look invisible anymore. It looks like a diagram. A massive diagram. You might be one name somewhere in the middle. But that's enough. Because the goal isn't necessarily to arrest the first person they find. The goal is to understand how everything connects. Investigators begin collecting evidence over months, sometimes years, and eventually, they identify the leadership, the money, the suppliers, the transportation network. The people protecting it. Then comes the moment you never expected. The arrests don't happen one at a time. They happen together. Multiple states. Multiple teams. Multiple doors. At almost the exact same moment. Because if one person is arrested early, the others can disappear. Phones can be destroyed. Money can move. So investigators wait. They build the map. And when the picture is complete, they move. One morning. Multiple locations. One coordinated operation. You thought you were one small line in the organization. But the investigators weren't hunting the line. They were hunting the entire map. Level 5, kidnapping. You're 40. And this time, the clock is against everyone. A person is missing. A ransom demand has been made. And suddenly, investigators don't have months. They may not even have days. They have hours. A specialized response begins immediately. Phones are analyzed. Financial accounts are monitored. Cellular data is examined. A command center is established. Multiple teams begin working simultaneously. One team handles surveillance. Another tracks financial activity. Another works with the victim's family. Another analyzes communications. Everything happens at once. Because in a kidnapping case, time is not just evidence. Time is the enemy. You make a mistake. You choose a ransom location. You think you've selected the perfect place. Lots of people. Lots of cameras. You believe the crowds will protect you. Instead, they create evidence. Investigators begin collecting footage. One camera captures your vehicle. Another captures your movement. Another catches your face. A license plate is identified. That plate leads to a rental agreement. The rental agreement leads to a name. The name leads to you. The entire chain develops in minutes. You think you're disappearing. But you're leaving behind a trail in real time. Less than 2 days after the kidnapping. Agents are closing in. And this time, the investigation isn't about waiting. It's about speed. Because there are crimes where patience is the greatest weapon. And there are crimes where patience can cost someone their life. Kidnapping is one of the second kind. The FBI doesn't get to choose when the clock starts. The clock starts the moment the victim disappears. Level 6, Organized Crime. You're 44, and you've spent years inside an organization. You're not the boss. You're not the public face. You're somewhere in the middle. You think that makes you safe. It doesn't, because the investigation isn't really about you, it's about the organization. For years, investigators have been building a case. Confidential sources provide information. Financial analysts follow money. Investigators examine businesses that appear legitimate. But underneath, the money tells a different story. The organization has structure. Leadership. Enforcers. Financial operations. Connections. And investigators want to understand every part. Because arresting one person isn't enough. If the leader disappears, someone else takes the position. If one lieutenant is arrested, another replaces him. So the strategy changes. Don't remove one piece. Understand the entire structure. Then, remove everything at once. Years of investigation can come down to a single morning. Doors open. Teams move. Arrests happen across multiple locations. The organization wakes up, and suddenly discovers that the people around it are gone. The leadership. The money. The enforcement network. The people responsible for keeping the machine alive. You are one of those arrests, and that's when you realize something terrifying. You weren't the target. Not really. You were part of the target. The organization itself was the thing being hunted. Level 7, Cybercrime against critical targets. You're 47. And you've learned how to attack computers. You find a target. A hospital network. You deploy ransomware. Systems go offline. Then you demand money. To you, it's business. A digital hostage situation. You don't see the patients. You don't see the doctors. You don't see the consequences. Until you turn on the news. Surgeries are delayed. Patients can't be transferred. Doctors are struggling to access information. And suddenly, the crime doesn't feel so abstract anymore. But now the investigation has changed. This isn't a traditional crime scene. There may be no fingerprints. No witness who saw your face. No security camera showing you walking away. Instead, there are digital footprints. Cryptocurrency transactions. Wallet addresses. Exchange records. Servers. Timestamps. Every digital move you made may have left a record somewhere. You thought cryptocurrency would make you invisible. But investigators don't necessarily need to know your name. They can follow the money. One wallet. Then another. Then another. You move the funds. You split them. You try to hide them. But the blockchain keeps the history. The trail doesn't simply disappear. Investigators may spend months following it. Not chasing you physically, but tracing the path your money took. Eventually, the digital trail reaches a real-world exchange. Then an account. Then a person. Then you. You believed the technology was protecting you, but the same technology that made your crime possible may also have preserved the evidence. You weren't discovered because someone made a lucky guess. You were discovered because the trail never truly disappeared. Level 8, Serial Violent Crimes. You're 51, and you've committed violent crimes across multiple states. But there's a problem. Each crime looks different. Different locations. Different victims. Different years. Local investigators handle each case separately, and for a long time, no one sees the bigger picture. Then someone notices something. A pattern. A behavior. A detail that keeps appearing. Something so subtle that no one investigating a single crime would have recognized it. But when the cases are placed next to each other, the connection becomes impossible to ignore. A specialized team begins analyzing the pattern. Behavior. Geography. Timing. Crime scene characteristics. The investigators start asking a different question. Not, who committed this crime? But, who could have committed all of them? That changes everything. A geographic profile begins narrowing the possibilities. The search area becomes smaller. Then smaller again. Meanwhile, old evidence is examined using newer technology. Evidence that was collected years ago may now reveal something investigators couldn't detect at the time. A DNA profile. A match. A connection. Years of uncertainty suddenly collapse into one answer. You may have believed that time was protecting you. That every year without an arrest meant you were safer. But time can work both ways. Cases don't always disappear. Sometimes. They wait. They wait for technology. They wait for new evidence. They wait for the right connection. And then, one ordinary day, there's a knock at your door. 2 agents. A warrant. Years of investigation behind them. And suddenly, the mystery that lasted for years is over in seconds. Level 9, International Criminal Organization. You're 55. Your operation is no longer limited to one country. Money crosses borders. People cross borders. Information crosses borders. And now, the FBI can't solve the case alone. The investigation becomes international. And that creates a completely different problem. Every country has its own laws. Its own courts. Its own evidence requirements. Its own bureaucracy. An investigator can't simply call another country and demand evidence. There are legal procedures. Diplomatic channels. Formal requests. Approvals. Translations. And that's why international investigations depend on relationships. Years before your case ever existed, investigators may have built connections with foreign law enforcement agencies. Those relationships suddenly become critical. Because when your operation spans 3 countries, the investigation has to move across all 3. A coordinated operation is planned. Teams in different countries prepare at the same time. Everyone waits. The timing has to be perfect. Because if one team moves too early, someone else might escape. Then comes the signal. Move. 3 countries. Multiple locations. Different time zones. The same operation. And you suddenly discover something you never expected. Your organization may have been international. But so was the investigation. You are arrested. But the case isn't over. Now comes extradition. Court proceedings. Evidence reviews. Legal challenges. The crime may have taken minutes to commit. The investigation may have taken years. And the legal process may take even longer. Because international investigations don't move at the speed of a chase. They move at the speed of governments. Level 10, Terrorism. You're 59, and you've crossed the final line. You've become involved in a terrorist plot. But here's the difference. The FBI isn't waiting for the crime to happen. The goal is to stop it, before the attack, before the casualties, before the headlines. This is where the entire investigative system changes. A joint terrorism task force activates. Federal agents, local law enforcement, Intelligence analysts, specialized investigators. Multiple agencies begin sharing information. The investigation becomes massive and incredibly fast. Financial intelligence, digital evidence, human intelligence, communications, international information. Everything is moving simultaneously. The scale is unlike anything you've seen before, and the urgency is completely different. In a normal investigation, waiting may be acceptable. Here, waiting can be catastrophic. Briefings happen constantly. Information is shared immediately. Decisions that might normally take weeks can happen in minutes, because the cost of being wrong is enormous, and the cost of being too slow could be even greater. The investigation may use almost every capability we've seen in the previous 9 levels. Financial tracking, digital forensics, behavioral analysis, international cooperation, surveillance, human intelligence. Everything converges. Not one piece at a time, but all at once. And that's what makes this level different. You aren't being hunted by one investigator. You aren't being hunted by one field office. You're being investigated by an entire network of capabilities. The moment the threat is identified, the machine begins moving. And this time, there is no waiting for the picture to slowly complete itself. The picture is already urgent. Every second matters, and the investigation closes around you. Within days, you're apprehended. The plot is stopped. And the machinery that was built to respond to threats like this has done exactly what it was designed to do. The real lesson: 10 levels, 10 crimes, 10 completely different investigations, but underneath them all, the same basic architecture: a file, an investigator, a piece of information, then another, then another. At level 1, the government may need only a database and a discrepancy. At level 3, it may need surveillance and forensic evidence. At level 4, multiple offices may build an entire network map. At level 7, the trail may exist entirely in digital records. At level 9, the investigation may cross international borders. And at level 10, multiple agencies may activate simultaneously. But the principle stays the same. The FBI doesn't always need to catch you in the moment you commit the crime. Sometimes it waits, sometimes it watches. Sometimes it connects. Sometimes it follows the money. Sometimes it follows the data. Sometimes it follows the pattern. And sometimes it simply waits for you to make enough mistakes that the investigation becomes inevitable. That's the part most people never see. The headline says, "Suspect arrested," but the arrest is usually the final scene. The real story happened long before that. The records. The phone calls. The transactions. The surveillance. The interviews. The evidence. The databases. The analysts. The agents. The people you never knew were watching. All of it slowly building toward one moment. A knock on the door. And by the time that knock comes, the investigation may already be finished. You just haven't been told yet. Because the FBI doesn't hunt you like one person hunting another. It hunts through a structure. A network. A system designed to collect information from different places, and eventually turn that information into a picture. Sometimes that picture takes an afternoon to complete. Sometimes it takes years. But the bigger the crime, the more resources are brought into the search. The more complex the network. The more complex the investigation becomes. And the more you try to hide, the more pieces you may leave behind. So the next time you hear about a major federal arrest, remember this. The moment you see on the news is rarely the moment the investigation began. It may have started months earlier. Maybe years. And somewhere, long before the headlines, someone may have already opened a file. Someone may already be connecting the dots. Someone may already be building the map. And you may never know. Until the investigation is complete. Because when the knock finally comes, the hunt is usually over. The only question left is whether you knew it was happening. If you enjoyed this journey through the hidden side of federal investigations, subscribe for more. Because every week, we explore what happens behind the headlines. Before the world ever hears the story.